Hey guys.
Veronica.
Andrew.
And Nate here. We are
Foodies Watching Movies.
A podcast dedicated to
awesome movies,
great food,
and that's about it.
Check us out on the JIC network at www.journeyintocomics.com.
Maybe throw some money over to our Patreon
so we can eat this week.
And now your feature presentation.
The following podcast is a Journey into Comics network production. From the suburbs of Chicago and Illinois, this is the Puhr Report with your host, Andrew Puhr.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to episode 41 of the Puhr Report. 41 episodes. That is something. Definitely not something I actually ever expected getting to. 41 is... it's not that far from 50, really, when you get down to it. There's definitely a lot of episodes behind me. It's hard to believe we're getting close to that 1 year mark. But 50 episodes is going to be exciting. I know there's some stuff in the works. And I was thinking about what to do for 41, and my life's been kind of hectic as Liz and I get near to our home closing and that next phase of our lives. And for those of you who tune into other shows on the network, you'll know that Liz and I have a show together called Adulting Ain't Easy, which I appreciate you guys listening to our pilot. And then the episode 2 is actually going to be dropping tomorrow for those who are listening to today's episode. So definitely check that out. It's also on the social medias at Adulting's Hard on Facebook and Twitter. So we'll be having links to those and some comments. And I think once our lives get a little more on track, we'll definitely be more active on social media, or at least I will be. But I just really appreciate those of you who check this out. I know we've got a lot of listens and a lot of Facebook activities, so definitely great news there. But when I'm trying to think about this episode, there's a lot that needs to be covered and a lot I wanted to cover, but just time has just been kind of get away from me. So I decided, instead of tackling the massive Trump news from the past week, that I was going to do a Trump-free episode. We don't have those very often. I think if you took all of the episodes I've done, Trump's probably in 90% of them. Maybe between 75 and 90% of them he's in. So it's kind of nice to maybe have an episode that we're getting away from it. I mean, there'll be some talk of the White House, and the Puhr Report for this week has some fun info. But yeah, I just wanted to keep it pretty easy, pretty straightforward, keep it kind of loose this week, and then there'll be some more fun news next week, so I'm probably going to record another episode in the next day or two that we'll talk about, that'll drop next Tuesday, just because between now and then, my week's going to get even more hectic, because once we close, there's a lot of housework and yard work and all that stuff that'll need to be done, so definitely a lot going on, but I want to make sure you still get an episode from me, and more news that's going on, and it might be a follow-up episode to stuff that I've covered previously, like whatever happened to that 30-year-old kid who was court-ordered to move out of his parents' house, or what's going on with the volcano, or what's going on in Santa Fe and Stoneman Douglas. So just probably some follow-up, and I'll probably be recording that the next day or two, which will be up early on Patreon for those of you who subscribe for $1 for early access, or you can get access to some exclusive content for $3, and that's at patreon.com/journeyintocomics. But that's enough plugs and talk about me. Let's kind of get into the news for this week. And I think one of the things that was surprising to me was involving the White House. And that's probably the closest I'm going to get to Trump on this week's episode. And that is, there's a White House Bible study for the first time in like over 100 years. A White House Bible study is being led by a pastor who is anti-gay, anti-women, and anti-Catholic. And as a Catholic myself, that's kind of disconcerting. So, the first Bible study group held for the U.S. cabinet in at least 100 years is led by a pastor who believes homosexuality is illegitimate, who doesn't believe women should preach, and has described Catholicism as a false religion. 10 members of the cabinet, including Vice President Mike Pence, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, and Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, sponsor the study group, which holds meetings lasting between an hour and 90 minutes every Wednesday, according to BBC News. It unfolds at a location in Washington, D.C. that is kept secret for security reasons. Its leader is Ralph Drollinger, a pastor and president of Capital Ministries, an organization which aims to evangelize elected officials and lead them toward maturity in Christ. The 63-year-old former pro basketball player from California founded Capital Ministries with his wife in 1996 to offer prayer groups, Bible study meetings, and private ministry to politicians. It now operates in 43 state capitals and over 20 locations outside of the U.S. The outspoken pastor sparked controversy for his views on women, same-sex relationships, and Catholicism. Arguing that women and men have different roles, he claimed in the BBC News interview, "There's a prohibition of female leadership in marriage and female leadership in the church, and those are clear in Scripture. It doesn't mean in an egalitarian sense that a woman is of lesser importance." And earlier this year, in a Bible study session released on the Capital Ministries website, he said, "Homosexuality and same-sex ceremonies are illegitimate in God's eyes." His word is repetitive, perspicuous, which clearly expressed, and stayed on the subject. Those comments come after he wrote in a Bible study addressed in the U.S. Capitol in 2013, "Not only is homosexuality and same-sex marriage voided by God and His Word, but biology as well castigates homosexuality and same-sex marriage. The ultimate outcome is the discontinuation of the species since homosexualities cannot procreate. For sure, one cannot be homosexual and an evolutionist at the same time." In 2004, Arlington was criticized for declaring Catholicism is one of the primary false religions of the world. As a result, progressive campaigners have objected to Drollinger's regular meetings with high-ranking U.S. politicians and fear the influence he could have on their political outlook. Asked whether he tells his students how to vote, Drollinger told BBC News that he will put the blueprint on the engineer's seat on the train, which will show the right tracks to the station. Well, that sounds kind of interesting. But I'm going to tell you what tracks to take, but you've got to be pretty stupid not to follow the blueprint because it's there. In a statement, the LGBT advocacy nonprofit, the Human Rights Campaign, called Drollinger an extremist. People look to their faith as a source of guidance and inspiration. LGBTQ people and our family and friends are no different, the group said. Drollinger's influence and involvement in the current administration is not only driving a wedge between faith communities and the LGBTQ community, but is turning back the clock on progress with the spread of even more divisive rhetoric throughout the highest ranking of governments. Jessica Stern, the executive director of LGBT advocacy nonprofit Outright Action International, told Newsweek, "Make no mistake, there is no mere study group. The organization has targeted American government officials, so it is, by definition, sought to blur the line between church and state. Their anti-woman and anti-LGBTQ view matters because the highest levels of American government are listening to them. Members of the president's cabinet must immediately withdraw their sponsorship of this organization." The representatives of the North America region of the International Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Trans, and Intersex Association. I've never heard of intersex before. That's a new one for me. "We have concerns that the administration is willing to accept counsel from individuals who are hostile towards the LGBTQ community. There are many faith leaders to whom the administration can receive counsel who are inclusive and do not discriminate against any community. Many people who identify as LGBTQ are spiritual and religious people, and the fact that the president is surrounded by people who seek religious counsel from an exclusionary and hateful person is problematic. The president should require his cabinet to open the religious studies to more inclusionary groups and individuals." The White House and Capitol Ministries did not respond to a request for comment. So that's a little interesting. I'm very much for the separation of church and state. I think holding a Bible study group within the White House or with White House administration on government grounds is a little bit much. It's tricky. Everyone is definitely willing to have the pastor they want, the religious figure that they want to go to or want to speak from. And this could even be a very different group if, say, Mike Pence was leading the group as opposed to someone who a lot of people in their eyes view as an extremist or, like the article says, anti-gay, anti-women, and anti-Catholic. So, I don't know, it's just weird, and I think the headline says more than the article really does. Because if they were going to a church with the same guy there, it probably wouldn't be, even though they're getting the same counsel from someone like him, it wouldn't be as big news as it being a White House-associated Bible study. And I've attended Bible studies. They're great for you if you want to learn more about certain topics in the Bible or just have that sense of community and insight into, at least in myself and with Catholicism or really whatever religion you aspire to, and if you're no religion at all. Well, I guess if you're no religion at all, you wouldn't be having a Bible study, so that's kind of a mute point. So that's what I thought was kind of interesting, and there's not really a good segue out of that But we can kind of keep it in the DC area and go to the next article, which is kind of appropriate given how close we are to Memorial Day, which was last week. And that is Arlington Cemetery, nearly full and may become more exclusive. To preserve space for future war heroes in the country's premier national cemetery, the Army is considering new rules that would turn away many currently eligible veterans. I've actually been to Arlington National Cemetery. I went there a few years back when I visited D.C. for a family reunion. It's a very powerful place to visit. It's just, it'll put you on your knees how just the sheer amount of people who are laid to rest there and go to the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier and the changing of the guard and all that. It's definitely a powerful scene. And you can, during our tour, which you kind of take a guided tour, you kind of get a little like tram car. There's a couple cars lined up, and there's kind of a tour guide who talks about it, and not overly loud because it is a place of rest for a lot of people, and it should be solemn and should be able to mourn. But just talking about how it is reached capacity, they're doing what they can and erecting large concrete mausoleums to store cremated remains or to people who want to be interned that way just to get as much space. But it's like they're on an island. They're pretty much landlocked by construction, by roads, by industry that's just around them. And it's almost at capacity, like they said. So I gotta wish that I'll kind of get back into the article. The solemn ritual of a burial with military honors is repeated dozens of times a day in foul weather affair at Arlington National Cemetery, honoring service members from privates to presidents, but in order to preserve the tradition of burial at the nation's foremost military cemetery for future generations, the Army which runs Arlington says that it may have to deny it to nearly all veterans who are living today. Arlington is running out of room, already the final resting place for more than 420,000 veterans and their relatives. The cemetery has been adding about 7,000 more each year. At that rate, even if the last rinds of open ground around its edges are put to use, the cemetery will be completely full in about 25 years. We're literally up against a wall, says Barbara Lewandowski, a spokesman for the cemetery, as she stood in the soggy grass where marble markers mark up the stone wall separating the grounds from a 6-lane highway. Even that wall has been put to use, stacked 3 high with niches for cremated remains. The Army wants to keep Arlington going for at least another 150 years, but with no room to grow, the grounds are hemmed in by highways and development. The only way to do so is to significantly tighten the rules for who can be buried there. Thank you, Max, for starting to scratch your collar at that moment. The only way to do so is significantly tighten the rules, but for who can be buried there. This has prompted a difficult debate over what Arlington means to the nation and how to balance egalitarian ideals against the site's physical limits. Sorry, there's just a lot of pictures in this article. The strictest proposal that the Army is considering would allow burials only for service members killed in action or awarded the military's highest decoration for heroism, the Medal of Honor. Under those restrictions, Arlington would probably conduct fewer burials in a year than it does right now in a single week. A policy like that would exclude thousands of currently eligible combat veterans and career officers who risked their lives in the service and who plan to be buried in Arlington among their fallen comrades. I don't know if it's fair to go back on a promise to an entire population of veterans, said John Towles, a legislative deputy director for veterans of foreign wars who deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. The group, with 1.7 million veterans, has adamantly opposed the new restrictions. Let Arlington fill up with people who have served their country, said Mr. Towles, who is eligible under current rules because he was wounded in battle, who can create a new cemetery that in time will be just as special. Arlington is not the only place for military burials, of course. There are 135 national cemeteries maintained by the Department of Veteran Affairs across the country, but Arlington is by far the most prominent, and curtailing burial there would mean changing the site from an active cemetery in something closer to a museum. In my own experience, it is also very much a museum. The main entrance is kind of a museum of sorts, gift shop, all that. I actually got, since I'm a big John F. Kennedy fan, and just a very interesting public figure, and I have a lot of books on him, and I actually got a copy of the DC paper from the day of, well, probably the day after his assassination, and just they have a lot of other stuff there that you can take, and, not take, but you can buy. That whole event was, kind of a nightmare because took a shuttle out there through like the bus tours, and then the bus tour stopped, so we had to take a cab back, and it was just a mess because they don't tell you they're going to stop servicing after a certain time. So, but that's beside the point. Back to the article. And actually, speaking of other national cemeteries that are maintained by the Department of Veteran Affairs. There actually is where I grew up in Danville, Illinois, there's also a national cemetery. But the Army is conducting a survey of public opinion on the question through the summer and expects to make formal recommendations in the fall. Where does the nation want us to do? Arlington Executive Director Kareem Durham Aguilera said in an interview, if the nation has the will to say we want to keep Arlington Special available, we have to make a change. In a fitting turn of history, the cemetery now faced with a threat of overcrowding was treated to address overcrowding. Early in the Civil War, the heavy death toll in battles near the Capitol soon filled Washington's existing cemeteries. Desperate for more burial space, the Quartermaster General of the Army, Montgomery C. Meigs, turned to a rolling green plantation just across the Potomac, the home of General Robert E. Lee, whose decision to fight on the Confederate side marked him as a traitor in many Union eyes. General Meigs' men began burying corpses beneath simple wood markers in the field and then, in a grim rebuke to the absent owner, lined the flower garden with the graves of Union officers and built a tomb near the door of the plantation house to hold the bones of 2,100 unknown dead. At first, Arlington was anything but a coveted resting place. Most early burials were of ordinary soldiers whose families could not afford to have their remains shipped home. But as revered Union officers later chose to be buried in Arlington among the troops, the cemetery rose in prestige. The Tomb of the Unknowns was erected after World War I, and on nearly every Memorial Day since then, the sitting president has laid a wreath there. Among the limestone rows are milestones of human progress: the first explorer to map the Grand Canyon, the first person killed in an airplane crash, the first astronauts to die during trying to reach space. Some distinguished themselves on the battlefield, others later in life, including Albert Sabin, who served briefly as a wartime Army doctor and went on to develop the polio vaccine, and Oliver Wendell Holmes Jr., a wounded Civil War lieutenant of little distinction who later became a Supreme Court justice. Most have been barred under restrictions now being contemplated by the Army. The modern concept of Arlington, an egalitarian Elysian field where generals and GIs of every creed and color are buried side by side, did not truly emerge until the cemetery was desegregated after World War II. According to Mickey McKellia, a history professor at the University of Connecticut, who has written about the cemetery, many look to the place as a self-evident case for national inclusion and belonging, as an expression of the many and diverse becoming one. Professor McKellia said in an interview that she said in the Arlington cited by Khizr Khan, the father of an army captain killed in Iraq and buried at the cemetery when he urged Donald J. Trump to visit. Look at the graves of the brave patriots who have died defending the United States of America, Mr. Khan said in a speech at the 2016 Democratic National Convention. You'll see all faiths, genders, and ethnicities. Now, though, that all-inclusive idea is bumping up against the lack of space. Arlington has tried to stretch what room it has. It ended the old practice of burying family members side by side and now stacks them 2 or 3 deep in a single plot. In sections that hold only cremated remains, the rows are now spaced close together, but planners say those measures can only do so much. Under current rules, burial plots in Arlington are open to veterans who served long enough to retire from the military, to troops who were wounded in battle received one of the 3 highest awards for valor, to prisoners of war, to troops who die while on active duty, and to a few civilians who serve in high-level government posts. Their spouse and dependents are also eligible. The Army has laid out several proposals for changing those rules to keep Arlington open longer, but only the most restrictive options would make much difference, and those are the least popular among veterans. Everybody wants to see Arlington stay open, says Gerardo Avila, a wounded Iraq veteran who spoke to Congress on the issue on behalf of the American Legion. He said that while he would gladly give up his own spot to ensure a place for future Medal of Honor recipients, the Legion, with 2.3 million members, does not share that view. You're voting your own rights away, he said. I'm not sure our members are willing to do that. Army surveys indicate that the public support gives priority to troops killed in battle or awarded the Medal of Honor, but it is not hard to find graves in Arlington of arguably deserving men and women who did neither. On a recent evening, Nadine McLaughlin knelt before the grave of her husband, Colonel Joseph McLaughlin, to trim the grass with scissors before arranging a bright vase of lilies. Colonel McLaughlin was a fighter pilot who strafed the beaches of Normandy on D-Day. A week after the invasion, he was shot down and, though wounded, made his way back through enemy lines to safety. He went on to fly more than 100 more missions, earning the Legion of Merit, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and 17 air medals for acts of heroism in flight. He survived the war and lived for 6 more decades until 2005, so under the most restrictive proposals, he would not qualify for burial at Arlington. My Joe was a wonderful man, very courageous, very kind, Miss McLaughlin said. I'm not sure that's fair, to cut out men like him. They were in the line of fire even if they made it. Being buried here with his friends means a lot to him. It's really a dilemma. So it's definitely very clear. I saw firsthand the amount of overcrowding and what they're doing to try and get as much space utilized out of Arlington as they can. But yeah, in my lifetime, Arlington will probably become full. And they'll have to do something about it. It's not like they can create more space. They can't find a chunk of land near Arlington and just say, this is Arlington 2, or the second campus, or whatever you would even call it. This is hollowed ground. People of every war have been buried here. And it's hard to say that there's going to be a time when it's going to be full, but that's life, and I guess death, that there's only a finite amount of space that we have at Arlington, and so eventually it's going to become, and it's hard because there have been people who have served, and they want to be buried with their brothers or sisters they served with. They want to be buried in Arlington with them, and all you can do is just make another national cemetery dedicated to those who've served our country in the wars across the world. So I think that's the only option. I think saying you can't is restrictive, because regardless of what you did in combat or what you did during the war, everyone who serves should have a right to be buried in Arlington. It shouldn't be that restrictive. I'm not a military person. My grandfather, well, both grandfathers served, and uncles and them have served as well. And I think if they wanted to, they should have been able to be buried at Arlington or any other national cemetery. And some most want to be buried with their families. So it's just kind of on those. But I think if you served and you want to be buried at Arlington, that shouldn't be something that should stop you. But the sad truth is, with the amount of people who have served and are certainly alive that have served in wars that are currently eligible, that number will fill up Arlington many times over, and there's just not the space for that. So I guess we'll have to kind of see what goes from there. I have to go from this somber topic to another topic on the Puhr 4, and I don't know which of the two that I have next would be worth talking about, so I'm going to go to one that's also kind of depressing. I'll save the more interesting story for last. So this is an article from CNN. Cannabis oil stopped his seizures but may keep him from his football dream. So there is a college football player named C.J. Harris. He's a standout, strong safety who uses cannabis oil for his seizures. He committed to play for Auburn University, but was notified that the NCAA will not allow him to play. So a high school football player who takes cannabis oil to prevent his seizures has been ruled ineligible to play in college, a decision that has sparked outrage from advocates, lawmakers, and sports fans. Former Big Ten Coach of the Year sharply criticized this decision, saying, "It's not fair to the kid," and urged the NCAA to reconsider. C.J. Harris, a standout strong safety, helped lead Warner Robins High School to the Georgia State Championship game and committed to play for Auburn University next season. He was recently notified by Auburn coaches that the NCAA will not allow him to play if he remains on cannabis oil, according to CNN affiliate WGXA. Under NCAA guidelines, athletes are not permitted to have any tetrahydrocannabinol in their systems, known as THC. It is one of the active ingredients in cannabis. It has some medical application, but also psychoactive and can cause a high. The other active cannabis ingredients, cannabidiol or CBD, does not produce a high and is thought to offer wide-ranging health benefits, including against seizures. The cannabis oil Harris takes for his seizures contains less than 0.3% THC, according to the label. We won't be able to pass an NCAA drug test while in the medicine, WGXA reported. We urge the NCAA to review their existing guidelines on THC and explore possible exceptions to allow players under medical treatment like CJ the ability to fulfill their dreams of playing college football. Phil Gatton, president and CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation, a nonprofit advocacy group, said in a statement, "We hope the NCAA will reconsider their decision and assess CJ on his character and talent as a football player." Gatton said though he couldn't comment specifically about Harris's use of CBD oil to treat his seizures, the Epilepsy Foundation is committed to advocating for people with epilepsy live their fullest lives and realize their dreams. We support safe, legal access to medical cannabis and CBD if a patient and their healthcare team feel that the potential benefits of medical cannabis or CBD for uncontrolled epilepsy outweighs the risks. The NCAA has not responded to a request for comment. Jerry Kill, who was named Big Ten Coach of the Year as the head football coach of the University of Minnesota, even as he battled his own seizure disorder, was sharply critical of the decision, and for an interview with CNN, he urged Auburn and the NCAA to come together to reconsider the decision. That young man should not be punished for a disorder that is being controlled by cannabis oil, said Kill, who had to retire due to seizures and has been a champion for those with epilepsy. I encourage both parties to take a good look at what they're doing to a young man's dream. It is not safe for him to play, that is one thing, but if it's because he's using CBD oil and they won't let him play, that's another. A kid should not be punished for his seizures being brought under control. It's not fair to the kid. Harris was an eighth grader when he suffered his first seizure, but his sophomore year in high school he was having 2 or 3 seizures a month. Typical anti-seizure medications didn't work, so his doctor eventually put him on cannabis oil. He has not had a seizure since, began taking it in January 2017. CBD is legal for people with seizure disorders in Georgia as well as in neighboring Alabama, where Auburn is located. Harris planned to attend Auburn, his dream school, as a walk-on next season. I saw everything lining up perfectly for me. But that dream was shattered when he was notified by Auburn staff that the NCAA ruled him ineligible if he stayed on cannabis oil. You're taking something